Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Provincetown, where we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person and where we support each other on our spiritual search for truth and meaning. My name is Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I am so glad that you have joined us this morning. Is that Jonathan? Hi. Welcome to those of you in the room, and welcome also to those joining us on our live stream. What a week it's been in Provincetown. Oh, my heart goes out to all of you who live between Snow and Point Streets, wherever those are, and all the business owners and folks relying on tips, and everyone vacationing here who had a much different week than they had planned. What a trying experience you've navigated these last few days. And hats off to the DPW workers and Roderick's crew and everyone else who worked round the clock to get our sewer systems back online. Yeah. This has been a real reminder to be so grateful for flushing toilets and running water. We take these things so much for granted, and there are so many people around the world who don't have these things. So may this experience call us back to gratitude, empathy, and generosity. Now, before we begin our worship service, I have just a few announcements to share. Great music tonight at 5 is a return to Broadway with a celebration of Sondheim. Come hear celebrated and obscure musical gems from this legendary composer and lyricist, performed by the Great Music at 5 Broadway Ensemble. And then Monday night at 5, I hope you can join me and Racial Justice Provincetown for a really rich presentation and discussion about critical race theory. Now, that term is being bandied about a lot lately, mostly by folks from the right who are using it as a scary term, to say that we shouldn't be talking about race in our schools. But what exactly is critical race theory? Why is it under attack? And how should those attacks be met? We will be joined by Keith Brooks, a retired New York City high school teacher who believes that any honest teaching of U.S. history can't avoid the basic tenets of critical race theory. He says that those of us who believe in racial justice need to be prepared to stand up against the critique and misunderstanding and weaponizing, really, of this term and its actual meaning. He'll give a presentation and answer questions and then open up the conversation for all of us to share our thoughts on this hot button topic, or you can just come and listen. It's tradition in this congregation and many UU congregations to hold a water communion service the Sunday after Labor Day in September. Folks bring a small amount of water from someplace special to them and add it to our communal bowl, which is then blessed. So this is your reminder to start collecting water if you find yourself communing with a beautiful water source in the next few weeks. Coffee hour will be out on our lawn today. We hope that those of you who are here in person can linger a while under the tent. And then on Tuesday at 5, we'll have our online coffee hour on Zoom. Let us know if you need that link. And finally, I have some sad news to share with you this morning. Alan Gallant, longtime member of this congregation, passed away on Friday morning. Alan was not able to be active here in recent years, but those of you with longer histories at the UU will remember him as the one who brought theater to AB Hall and who stood on our roof hosing off our building all night long when Whalers Wharf was on fire. So we are grateful to you, Alan, and we light a candle in your memory this morning as we share a moment of silence. Thank you. Now let's continue by affirming our community's covenant. I invite you to repeat each line after me. Love is the spirit of this meeting house. This is our great covenant. To dwell together in peace. To seek the truth in love. And to help one another. This time I invite Jane to light our chalice for us. As we light our chalice here in the sanctuary, I invite those of you watching from home to light a candle wherever you are, and that way we can feel connected even while we are apart.
The reading this morning is by Paul Sprecher. We light this chalice to honor the memory of those who have come before us, kindling flames of wisdom in dark times, willing to challenge orthodoxy, even at great personal risk, giving us a legacy of freedom and love, of truth, a legacy that warms our hearts and lights our paths.
Please join me now in a spirit of meditation and prayer. If you have a joy or a sorrow on your heart this morning, you're welcome to light a silent candle during the prayer or any time during the service at the table to the right of the pulpit, and there is a journal there to record your thoughts and prayers. Our meditation this morning is a little different. It's a poem called The Peace of Old Cape Cod. And I'm not sure who wrote it, but it was included in a book called The Provincetown Book, published in 1922 by Nancy Payne Smith, who grew up here in Provincetown in the mid-1800s. And she later became a Unitarian minister, one of the very early women to do so. This poem doesn't reflect our updated language for the divine, but it does evoke that healing connection to nature that we so enjoy. So I invite you to think about what brought you here to Cape Cod, either to live or to visit, and perhaps what has healed for you here as I read the verses. The peace of old Cape Cod. Nobody ever tried to put it into words. The birds, the trees, the ponds, the sudden stretches of the sea, the fields windswept and free, the hills where quiet feet have trod, the heavenly peace of old Cape Cod. Nobody ever tried to make a poem of it or painted pictures doing justice to it. And yet the lives that harassed, torn, and bleeding become less forlorn, grew healed where lies the living sod, the matchless peace of old Cape Cod. Heartsick of cities' clamorous strife and yearning for a wiser life, found here their hopes fulfilled. The goldenrod and aster grew above the sorrows once they knew. Made o'er again, they learned of God and walked with him on old Cape Cod.
wife, the shape of justice. Lord, hold me close. Rise up, my friend. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. The reading this morning is by Violet Kochendorfer. A word, a piece of wood, something to gather and burn, a feeling that recalls or nags without explaining. What does it conjure in your mind? Nostalgic fires on a beach, the solitude of sheltered coves, the loneliness of not belonging, or spontaneity, freedom, beauty, joy. From nature's patterned precision in crystals, we have learned the secrets of our universe. In Driftwood, she speaks to us of other things. She speaks to me of people, of myself and others I have known. I think of towering giants once firmly rooted in the earth, attacked by sudden storms of wind and rain, or some where anchoring earth was melted imperceptibly by streams or waves until they fell. And those which fell in water and were buffeted and tossed for years gave up one earthly body to be reborn in myriad forms and shapes. And this drifting evolution, and in this drifting evolution, some were soft and sick and could not weather through. Their bodies waterlogged, slowly sank and disappeared. But others, with a strong and sturdy heart, lived on and grew in beauty. The jagged edges of their fractures healed and softly smoothed by intimate communing with their world. If life were good and growth within the first carnation easy and unbound, reincarnation might be often straight and uniform. But if twisted, gnarled, and strong from bending with the wind, or growing round some hurt of life to seal it in with understanding love, then evolution might produce unique and fascinating forms beyond our own imaginations to create. I like to think that our religion is a way of looking, a sensitive awareness that ever sees in new perspective, all with overtones of warmth, commitment, and concern. And each in his own way of looking will discover things that only he can know or feel or see through his own eyes, her fingertips, their heart. This is their need, their destiny. So if you do not share my feeling for this simple gift of nature, it does not matter. For you are you and I am I, but this I know. For those who do is given life in more abundance, greater depth, that will sustain through wind and storm and rain, year after year.
Thank you. Now is the time in our service where we take a collection for the ongoing support of this meeting house and our shared ministry. As we enjoy a musical reflection, we welcome your donations here in the sanctuary and online through PayPal or Venmo. You can find that information on our website, uumh.org. On and off-site, your offerings will now be gratefully received.
This musical reflection is a hymn, number 23. It has lots of words, and it might be something you'd like to follow along with in the hymnal. Bring many names, beautiful and good, celebrate in parable and story, holiness and glory, living, loving God. Hail and Hosanna, bring many names, strong Mother God, working night and day, planning all the wonders of creation, setting each equation, genius at play. Hail and Hosanna, strong Mother God, warm Father God, hugging every child, feeling all the strains of human living, caring and forgiving till we're reconciled. Hail and Hosanna, warm Father God, old aching God, gray with endless care, calmly piercing evil's new disguises, glad of new surprises, wiser than despair. Hail and Hosanna, old aching God, young and growing God, eager still to know, willing to be changed by what you've started, quick to be delighted, singing as you go. Hail and Hosanna, young and growing God, great living God, never fully known, joyful darkness far beyond our seeing, closer death than breathing, everlasting home. Hail and Hosanna, great living God.
Thank you. Growing up in the 1920s, Violet Kochendorfer didn't know a woman could be a minister. But in a wonderful, roundabout way, she became one. This morning, I share her story with you and delight in the ways that it overlaps with the story of our own congregation, and perhaps your own stories too. Was there something that you could not imagine growing up that then came to pass in your lifetime? Is there something that you cannot imagine now, except in your innermost longing, that might come to be in the future? What mixture of courage and luck and encouragement does it require to make our dreams come true? And what people came before us that helped to build the foundations that launch and sustain us? What driftwood edges are softening within you as you bob and dunk beneath the waves and experiences of life? These are the questions that we consider as I share Violet's story with you this morning. Born in 1912, Violet was raised in Minnesota as a Lutheran in a middle-class family. She had no thought of going to college. Back then, women, if they worked outside the home at all, were secretaries, nurses, or teachers. But Violet had a friend at the YWCA named Edna, who kept insisting that she should go to college. Finally, giving in to Edna's urgings, Violet enrolled in Reed, a small liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon. But when her money ran out after just 2 years, Violet left. She accepted a position as a junior stenographer, and eventually she was promoted up the ranks to be personnel director. But when her salary moved up to $7,500 a year, the regional office insisted on employing a man instead. They could not justify paying a woman such a sum. The new man came in and put a typewriter back on Vi's desk, and she quit. That's right. This resignation pattern reflected my strong conviction, Violet said, that if I wasn't excited about what I was doing, the inevitable discontent was too high a price to pay for the security of staying. When World War II began, she applied for overseas service with the American Red Cross. She sailed on the troop ship Queen Mary on Easter Sunday of 1944 and spent 3.5 years in the European theater. She experienced D-Day in England and was with the 82nd Airborne Division as they made the historic crossing of the Elbe to meet the Russians and accept surrender of the 21st German Army. They celebrated with the Russians in the ballroom of the Duke of Mecklenburg's palace, raising their glasses high to toast Stalin as the Russians toasted Roosevelt. But a visit to the concentration camp that they had liberated brought her back down to the horrors of war. Later, they provided a mass funeral for its victims and a soup kitchen to feed thousands of starving, displaced persons from 6 nations. After the end of the war, they moved into Berlin as occupation troops. And in Berlin, Violet had dinner with General Eisenhower. After 3.5 years of war, coming home was difficult. Violet doesn't elaborate on this in her biography, but I imagine the images of the concentration camp stayed with her vividly. And although the carnage of war made for a traumatic 3 years, it was also a time of great purpose and meaningful work. How could the mundane daily routine and the quiet, small existence expected of women in the 40s fulfill her after that? She was haunted and restless. After a few different moves, Vi ended up in Santa Fe, where she fell in love with New Mexico. She stayed 8 years. And during that time, she tried to return to the church of her childhood, the Lutherans. But the same childhood theological rebellion still bubbled up to the surface. She bristled against not being able to question, but only to believe. A friend invited her to check out the Unitarian Fellowship with him. She says she thoroughly enjoyed the discussions, but something seemed lacking. She wondered, what was religious about the Unitarians? She says, I realize now that I was questioning way back in the 50s. What I was questioning way back in the 50s is still a valid criticism of some of our fellowship groups. An overemphasis on individual freedom, she says, can lead to writing off too much of what I feel a good church experience is all about. Even so, she liked the people and attended regularly, but feeling restless again, Vi moved to Berkeley, California. Now, at this point in her life, she felt like something was calling her on, but didn't know exactly what. She wrote this poem. What is this thing that seems to guide my steps, that seems to know a plan that I can't see, that there is one I cannot help but feel, for I keep wandering in its maze, not knowing how or why or where. There's no beaten path ahead, but as I take each step, another one comes clear. I turn my head and marvel at the tiny pieces of the way I've come, fantastic in minute detail and timing. And after miles and thoughts of what I've left, I find myself returning to beginnings on another path that beckon far beyond my earlier imaginings. Violet couldn't imagine being a minister, but her new apartment turned out to be 2 blocks from Starr King School for the Ministry, a Unitarian seminary. She ended up going to parties there and getting to know the small student body and faculty. The students, all men, invited her to come to some of the seminars. Being a woman and without an undergraduate degree, Violet couldn't enroll, but she did sign up for the summer session, which whetted her appetite for theological reflection and collegiality. In the fall, she decided to meet with the school president to request permission to enroll as a full-time student. Somewhat amused by her, he said yes, with the caveat that she would not actually be able to get a degree at the end. Violet loved seminary. She loved the classes and the camaraderie, the deep thinking that was required. A highlight for her was a summer session led by Henry Nelson Wyman. While most of the male professors were intense intellectuals, Wyman described himself as a naturalistic mystic. This resonated for Violet, who had always felt that a kind of innate knowing had to be honored alongside the rational intellectual search. She valued nature and the ancient wisdoms of the world. It was about this time that Violet wrote her poem about driftwood that Jane shared as our opening reading. For one of her classes, Violet wrote, "God is the experience of feeling a part of the ongoing creative process of the universe, out of which we have evolved with human potential as the knowing part, and therefore the power of choice to further create or to destroy." At the end of her years at Starr King, but without a degree, Violet passed the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, a panel of clergy, psychologists, and lay people who assess candidates for the Unitarian ministry. But the road ahead would not be easy for a woman minister. As one colleague put it to her, "You'll never get your own church unless it's some little dying one, dying on the vine in New England." And that is essentially what happened. George Spencer, director of the UUA Department of Ministry, said he had just the church for her. Provincetown, Massachusetts. Here's what Violet writes about her candidating Sunday in Provincetown. "Sunday morning it was still raining, a real northeaster. Even though the streets were awash, a fair crowd came out to hear me. The church was right downtown, a huge 2-story white colonial building set back from the street with a lawn in front. Famed for its copy of a Christopher Wren tower, the church is said to be one of the most photographed in the area. The upstairs sanctuary seated 408 on cushioned pews of Cape pine with mahogany railings and armrests inset with ivory medallions of carved whale's teeth. There was no traditional pulpit, Vi said. The minister stood at an impressive broad mahogany rostrum on a raised platform. The huge circular chandelier of sandwich glass dated from 1847, the year the church was built. The most striking thing about the sanctuary was the remarkable trompe-l'oeil interior sepia wall and ceiling decoration, which gave a three-dimensional effect of Greek columns on the sides and a marble dome above, copied from the Temple of Jupiter in Athens. This was all explained in the printed orders of service, together with the story of how back in 1820, two little girls playing on the beach had found a book floating in the surf. It was the life of Reverend John Murray, preacher of Universal Salvation. The book was dried and passed around. Many read and believed, and thus began Universalism in Provincetown. And in 1829, the Church of the Redeemer Universalist. In the early days, the congregation filled the large church to overflowing, Vi writes. Its members had largely been ship captains during old whaling days, back when the church was not only the community's religious center, but also the social center and its welfare department. On the church books was the provision that if men were lost at sea, the church would be responsible for the welfare of widows and orphans, as the Bible decreed. My sermon that morning was entitled The Third Relationship, Vi remembers, and I suggested that after the first self-self issue and the next self-other, the third relationship was involved with how we see ourselves in relation to the universe. At a meeting following the service, the search committee asked Violet to become their minister. Later, one of the search committee members admitted that they felt a woman was their best bet with the salary they were offering. We might have got a second-rate man, they said, but we feel we got a first-rate woman. Once I had made the decision, I realized that there had been a selfish motive behind my decision to accept, Vi says. I had fallen in love with the picturesque setting of the town and was eager to begin exploring its dunes and beaches. It was a place others yearned to be able to visit once in a summer or a lifetime, and I could call it home. Because Provincetown was a Universalist church, I had something else to feel good about, she said. Just the year before, in 1961, the Unitarians and the Universalists had joined to form the Unitarian Universalist Association. In my predominantly large city Unitarian experience, I recalled the many come-outers who defined themselves by what they did not believe. Now I could experience the more positive orientation of the rural and small-town-oriented Universalists. Instead of the Calvinistic doctrine of predestination that only the elect would be saved, their God of love stood for universal salvation in simple and positive religious beliefs. Violet Kochendorfer was ordained and installed in Provincetown on December 9th, 1962. George Spencer delivered the ordination sermon and said, "Out of nearly 1,000 ministers, I think, Violet, that you are number 3 or 4 in the women's group. I need not remind you that the way is twice as difficult for a woman. Her ministry has to be superior in every way to make it possible for her to have a career in this profession. She will have to continually hammer at the doors of prejudice to make sure that her ministry is taken seriously. But it can be done, and I know you have accepted the challenge that confronts you." The first challenge before her turned out to be the name of the church. The Church of the Redeemer didn't scream liberal theology, she explained to the small congregation of long-timers. She worried she might offend them, but they didn't seem offended. On the spot, they changed the name to the Universalist Church of Provincetown, Universalist Unitarian. After the decision, many walked over to the home of the moderator, Jack Rosenthal, to celebrate with Rosenthal tea, which was their name for hard liquor. Violet had to learn to understand old Cape Codders, she said. Their bluntness seemed a protective shield. When she began an after-service coffee hour, 2 longtime influential members stayed away, saying loudly, "It has never been done before." But it wasn't long until they rejoined the flock. Several members of our congregation were gay, Violet remembers. I'd known gays who were accepted in the art atmosphere of Santa Fe and also in the Bay Area of California, so I expected to find gays in this famous art colony, she said. Joe and Jeff were 2 gay members who owned a lovely home on the harbor, but spent most of their time in New York City, where they ran a floral shop. They were solid Provincetown citizens, well known in town, and were to be 2 of my most valued members, Vi said, always ready with financial support, manual labor, or advice. Joe was a tall, imposing presence with graying, wavy hair. One had the sense that he was always in charge, though in a warm and gentle way. One was also attracted to genial Jeff, shorter and slimmer, a caring person who accepted his more retiring role with perennial cheerfulness. Their large 3-story home was right on the harbor, Vi remembers. As I entered, I saw Jeff in an overstuffed chair, some knitting on the arm. Each had a French poodle on their lap, one named Touche and the other Bijou. Our unguarded conversations supported my belief that no matter what kind of difference one has, if one accepts oneself without apology, others will feel comfortable in their acceptance as well. Violet befriended the Episcopal priest, Ernie, and his wife, Jane. Jane talked me into clamming one afternoon, Vi remembers. I'd never dug clams in my life, and I was intrigued by the idea. We took my car, parking it along the highway at the edge of town. After a couple of hours digging clams, Ernie joined us in his sailing clothes. We took off in their beach buggy to find oysters and scallops, leaving my Carmen Ghia parked near the Breakwater Motel. I knew that day why I'd decided to stay in Provincetown, as I became an honored guest, eating steamed clams at the Vanderburg's Outer Cape Beach House in Wellfleet. We had to hurry to get back in time to pick up my Ghia before the Friday night meeting of our mutual UU Episcopal discussion group, which we had decided to call the Inquirers. As we came down the harbor road, we found cars lined up all around the motel and floodlights out over the harbor. The police had been called when someone had seen the little car with California license sitting there for hours. They had found from the registration that it belonged to the new minister in town. Someone had seen me headed out on the bar with a clam rake. They feared that this landlubber from California went out and didn't know the tides. Well, that was one way of getting known in a hurry. Violet also befriended Mame, who she described as a large-bosomed, genial, and much-loved person in Provincetown. Turns out that Mame was a high-class call woman. We had a merry time, Vi said. I saw little of the regular members come May, Violet wrote. They were off getting ready for their summer jobs, running motels or gift shops, or renovating rental quarters to bring them income on which to live for the rest of the year. Beginning in June, many summer residents and visitors came, making an entirely different congregation whom I could try more creative services with. But she also got a taste of the Augustitis of the locals, which she called the summer something. Everyone is under such tension, Vi wrote, working so hard without a break, often ruining health to make enough in 8 weeks to exist on the rest of the year. Nevertheless, one comes to see that Provincetown is a town of paradox. It has one of the loveliest settings, with a natural vitality that can be one of the greatest, most inspiring, life-giving experiences. It does attract healthy, vital people. But come September, when thousands become hundreds, the sorting out seems to leave too many whom I feel are running away from life. They come here, the farthest out place on the East Coast, to escape, and some never get back. They come with the most complicated lives I've ever run into. In the end, as much as Violet enjoyed the countercultural bohemian life for her first year, she couldn't picture herself staying. Even though she had chosen an unconventional path herself, she found herself longing for more convention, more nuclear families and reliable volunteers who were employed more than 6 months out of the year. She was ill at ease with the sense in town that anything goes. And at the same time, she felt hemmed in by the older members of her congregation who, after the initial willingness to change their name, didn't want anything else to change. As she prepared to leave, she reflected on her time in Provincetown. For me, it has been a great, unusual education, she said. Any place I go from here is bound to be dull by comparison. And in all the disappointments, heartaches, joys, and triumphs of my first church, she said, I have at last found myself. As I sat in the captain's study here in the meeting house this week, outlining this sermon, it suddenly struck me that I was sitting in Violet's office. And as I was reading her book, A Modern Pioneer, which I found when we cleaned out the library, a letter dropped out of the cover. It was a typed letter from Marty Hassel to the members and friends of the UU Meeting House of Provincetown, inviting them to the ordination of Brenda Haywood on Saturday, April 17th, 1999. This is a long-awaited and much-deserved occasion, the letter said. She has done so much for the meeting house, its members, the town, and beyond. This will be a joyous way to honor her ministry. And on the back side of the letter was a handwritten note from Violet Kochendorfer in Duluth, Minnesota. And it said, "This so reminds me of my experience as the first woman minister in Provincetown. Thought I'd send you a copy of my second book, just in case you've not seen it. Please read Chapter 2, My First Church." That was going on 40 years ago. Are there any members who still remember those days, about 1963? I'd love to know. Vi K. Well, I don't think there were any members who had experienced Violet Kochendorfer's first ministry still attending the meeting house in 1999. But I do know that her legacy lives on. There have been many women ministers since then, and I just celebrated 10 years as your minister at the beginning of this month. And the gay men she mentioned, Joe and Jeff, they were Joseph Acker and Jeff Bosworth, who Acker Bosworth Hall was named after. When they died, they left us money, which would become our endowment, which is one of the reasons that this small New England church did not die on the vine after all. And the lovely home on the harbor, well, they left the bottom 2 floors of that home to the meeting house with the instructions that their dear friend, Dana Noble, could live there for the rest of his life. And this year, he passed away. His memorial service will be here on October 2nd after our worship service. And last week, we put the house at 607 Commercial Street up for sale, the proceeds of which will ensure that we will still be around for a long time into the future, a security that most churches of our size do not share. So yes, I've been thinking a lot this week about those that have come before us, those that have shaped this denomination and this town and this meeting house. I'll not forget the humbleness I felt each time I raised my eyes up to the stately steeple, Violet wrote, before I turned the key to enter in, which stands a monument to those who dreamed and sacrificed and worked to put it there. This morning, as we leave the meeting house and glance back at the steeple on the way to the rest of our day, or as we close down the computer or turn off the television screen, which magically hosts our weekly worship in a way that no one could have imagined back in 1847 or 1962, may we take a moment to be grateful for those who dreamed and sacrificed and worked to keep it here, and those who are doing so today. And may Violet's story call us back to gratitude, empathy, and generosity. Amen, and blessed be. It's become our practice to pose a question based on the theme of the service each week. It can be a topic of sharing out on the lawn today or with friends during the week. If you want to delve deeper into this conversation, we hope you can join us Tuesday at 5 at our Zoom coffee hour. Our question this week is, tell us about someone who paved the way for you to be where you are. Tell us about someone who paved the way for you to be where you are. Go in peace.